All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, which is being hosted by the Culture and Inclusion Cabinet. My name is Melissa Burt. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm on the faculty at Colorado State University in the Department of Atmospheric Science, and I also serve as the chair for the AMS Culture and Inclusion Cabinet. So today I'll be sharing some of the findings from the AMS Equity Assessment, which was conducted over this last year, and it was led by a consulting group named Integrated Work. And that group partnered with the AMS to sort of conduct and go through the whole process for this equity assessment. I'll also note that I was one of the members of the core planning team for the equity assessment with Integrated Work, in addition to Katie Putsavage, who's the AMS DEI director, and also Stephanie Armstrong, one of the associate executive directors with the AMS as well. So for today's roadmap, sort of as the title alludes to, I'm going to share a little bit about what was learned through the equity assessment process, where we're headed, and what some of the next steps are, and ways in which you all can sort of engage in that activity. Before I get started, I'll also note that if you have an interest in viewing the full report that was produced by Integrated Work, you can just take a snapshot of this QR code here to access that full report, and it will just link to the equity and inclusion page as part of the AMS website. And I should note, I'm also only sharing some of the findings. It was a pretty long report, so if you really have an interest in wanting to look at a deeper dive into the data, feel free to go check out that report. And then along the way this morning or this afternoon, wherever you may be joining us from, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions box, and I will just get to them as we go throughout today's webinar. So with that, I will get started. I wanted to share a little bit about what was the vision for conducting this equity assessment. The purpose of it really was to gather information, to really understand people's experiences and their engagement within the AMS. By conducting a process like this, it provides us with opportunities to see what are some of the challenges that the society could be facing or may be facing, and what are some opportunities for the society in order to be more diverse, more inclusive, and more equitable in that spaces. And the work of this assessment process really builds on the history of equity and inclusion and justice work that we've been doing within the AMS for decades, and sets the foundation of how we can develop more strategic and coordinated action around some of these issues. So to give just a quick snapshot on what the timeline of this process was, the project began back in January of 2023, where Integrated Work started talking with lots of individuals, a part of leadership, different stakeholder groups, to sort of understand where we were as a society when we think about equity and inclusion. As we moved into April and into the summer of 2023, the group really worked on gathering data. They held some focus groups. Again, they did some stakeholder engagement with leadership and other individuals. And then in July and August, they started working on the development of the culture survey tool, which was the survey that many of you took in September and October. And from the survey tool, after that, they held some post-survey focus groups, conversations, group interviews, and then we ended in January of 2024, so earlier this year, where we received the full outcome of what that equity assessment process was like. And we began starting to share out some of the recommendations or some of the strategies that were presented through that process. And so up to date, as we are, I guess it's May 30th today, the outcomes have been shared with the AMS Council. There was a town hall that took place at the annual meeting. There was a special session specifically for AMS staff to understand the experiences of folks who are part of the staff. And now I'm sharing this opportunity with the greater membership just to give everybody an idea of what was really learned in that process, understanding that this is an iterative process that will take place again over in a few years from now. So the survey or the activities that were developed as part of the process was really defined through a mixed methods approach. The culture survey had components that were more quantitative. They used some descriptive statistics, some regression models as part of that. There was also an avenue which was more qualitative, where they had to code information, pick out some of the themes that were there, and to really share with us some of the quotes that illustrated people's experiences and attitudes and behaviors in that way. In addition to the survey that people took, then they also conducted some focus groups, and you can see here on the right side of the screen the many different areas where the focus groups kind of centered on. If it was having specific conversations with staff, if it was learning from early career individuals about their experiences. There was a group that was very much focused on accessibility in various different ways as well. So this mixed methods approach really helped them define, what are the outcomes that I'm going to share with you today. So this whole process really set out to answer some core questions, wanting to understand what experiences are people having as participants or engaging with the AMS as it relates to belonging, bias, equity, access, and also perception. Who are having these specific experiences, and how are those experiences impacting their perceptions of the society? So just to share a little bit about some of the demographics as to who took the culture survey. So all in all, 2,421 people took the survey. About 2,900 people opened it, and of those individuals, 74% of them made it to the end of the survey, which is really great. The integrated work team wanted to note that they still were able to use some of the partial responses for analysis. So if people got about halfway through that survey, they still incorporated that into the data that was collected. And ultimately, I think it took people roughly around 11 minutes to complete that survey. So you will probably see some slight variations in the end numbers that are shown here over the next few slides. And this just really points to the fact that not everybody completed the survey once they started it. To give you an idea of the sort of affiliation and career stage of the respondents, you can see that the majority of respondents came from folks who identified as being members of the society. That includes corporate members, current members, weather band members, all a part of that activity. We also see there was a large portion of people who are non-members, and non-members could be categorized as people who used to be a part of the society and who are no longer actively paying membership, or they're folks who are just engaged through sort of the editor process, those sort of activities. The survey also, was sent out to the AMS staff, and although this number says 4%, I think it was around 90-some% of the staff took the culture survey, which was really great. If we then move to career stage, you can see the different groups here on the x-axis, but the career stage of survey respondents pretty much skewed towards the mid-career, late career individuals who took it. If we then shift just to get an idea of what the gender demographics looked like with the survey, you can see that here, 98% of folks were cisgender individuals and 1.9% were genderqueer. I also will make note, in order to protect some of the smaller groups of identities as it relates to gender, they sort of combined all of those categories into this genderqueer category. And then you can see here on the right side of the screen, looking at the participation count based off of man and woman, and they're using the category man to identify anyone, who identifies as a man in this situation. And so 64% of respondents identified in that way. Okay, this is probably why you're here. You were very interested in learning more about what were some of the findings that came out of the survey. So we're going to dive into that now. So when we asked, how much does equity and inclusion justice matter to you as an AMS community? 87% of our respondents agreed with that statement. They thought that equity, inclusion, and justice are important for the future of the weather, water, and climate community, and that the AMS should have an equity and inclusion and justice strategy that really informs all of the activities in which we embark in. And so I think at a very high level, this response and this piece really speaks to the importance that our members, that our non-members, that our staff, that our students all feel that this is a key central piece that is connected to the society. So as I noted, in our core questions, we really wanted to look at things as to belonging, equity, access, and inclusion. And so this first area is going to really focus on like, what does belonging mean, and how did we learn about that through this survey? So we know that belonging is really fundamental to inclusion and equity work, because it really creates a space where folks feel welcomed, they feel respected. It creates a culture that really supports our values and celebrates the difference in the backgrounds and perspectives that we may have. So at its core, I think we want to ensure that our society is one in which people feel that they belong to, that they connect with, and that they, really can grow and achieve things in that space. So through the survey, how did we learn about belonging? We really wanted to understand people's experiences with belonging at AMS or through AMS activities. One, at the interpersonal level, do they feel valued? Do they feel respected? Do they feel welcome? And at a greater organization level, are they participating in things where they're growing their learning around equity and inclusion justice issues? Are they engaging in activities that seek to bring community building as well? So some of the data look like this. When you ask folks, what are your experiences around belonging? People are saying like it's easy for them to build connections with the AMS. They feel that they are truly valued and respected by the staff. This is a volunteer society, right? As a volunteer professional society, but we have to work closely with the AMS staff in order to help, move things forward in that way. So it's really great to hear that many of our respondents and our members feel that they're respected in that way. They think that the culture of the AMS fully welcomes people of many different backgrounds, and so you see this in a lot of different ways, but I'll say that the feelings of belonging are not something that are felt the same across all identities and all perspectives. So when we look at this next figure, and this again is on sort of the interpersonal level, we can see on the sort of left side of the little scale that we have here, here are the individuals or the groups that feel as though they less likely belong, or they have that sense of belonging with the AMS. And then on the right side, you can see like sort of the areas in which people are more likely to feel as though they belong with the AMS. And so when we look generally at the results, it's been found that men are more likely to agree that the culture of the AMS fully welcomes people of different cultures. While when we look at women, they're more likely to agree that things like their culture, their language, and their background are really valued at AMS, but they may not always feel fully welcomed in those activities. And so sometimes this is a bit of a difference between people's personal experiences or individual experiences that they may have versus the abstract perceptions that may be out there as well. The team also pulled together like there's like hundreds of quotes as part of this activity, but they pulled together some quotes about what did they hear when they talked to individuals, specifically in some of those focus groups and even in the survey about belonging in AMS. So people are saying things, like really being able to celebrate their queerness and making themselves and their fellow queer colleagues feel welcome is something that they really enjoy, and they really value as part of their activities within the AMS. Other individuals have said, they don't want to feel tokenized in some of these activities, specifically if it's Latinx individuals or Black individuals, that they want to make sure that they can celebrate who they are and what they bring without the feelings of tokenism as well. And then people, having comments related to, wanting to see greater representation of people of color in leadership roles, even as members as well. So when we move to bias, it's really important that people are not experiencing bias, right? Bias is the opposite of, equity and inclusion and justice, because it really does create harm. It creates barriers for people to participate, and it really discourages people at times for participation. And as people experience more and more bias, it can lead to things like feeling even more excluded or more marginalized or re-traumatizing if there's certain things that may have happened. And so I think bias really weakens the fabric of like what we've created within the AMS and the community that we have, and it really will impede our goals of creating a society that is inclusive and just and really equitable in that way. So I think it's really valuable for us to learn about bias and how people have experienced and what are the different ways. So how did we learn about bias? Again, at the interpersonal level, wanting to see, who's experiencing bias, discrimination, harassment at AMS. And at an organizational level, like, do people even know how to report bias, or what extent does AMS take these reports really seriously? And so what was learned? Unfortunately, 1 in every 13 respondents said that they have encountered bias in some way in connection with their activities within the AMS. And 7.8% of people have reported encountering bias specifically at AMS sponsored events. So people have either, I guess it's 60% have experienced bias themselves, 48% have witnessed it, 32% have heard of it, and 31% of individuals have reported more than one way of experiencing bias. And these things are not mutually exclusive, right? Like, you may have experienced it, you may have seen it, all of these things can sort of compound on top of one another that can really lead to not great spaces or environments for folks. So if you want to know, what kind of bias are people experiencing at the AMS? The ideas here on the screen are just a few of them, but people have reported from a gendered perspective feeling that people are condescending to them, that they're dismissive, that their treatment of women at the AMS conferences and events is not great. People have had experiences that have been unsafe. They've had unwanted advances in those ways. From a racial bias perspective, people from minoritized racial backgrounds have reported feeling disrespectful. They've experienced discriminatory behaviors as well as racial harassment as well. Ability bias, people have shared that there have been barriers to access, making it challenging for them to participate and engage fully in our activities. Age bias, people reporting belittling or disparaging remarks may be made by senior members to maybe younger or early career professionals, and people not being taken seriously because of their age or perceived to be because of their age. And then in addition, just political affiliation bias. There's a perception that AMS leans heavily towards more liberal worldviews for things like climate change, causing people who may have more conservative viewpoints or perspectives to feel undervalued, to feel dismissed within the AMS. And so these are real things that people are experiencing. So it's important for us to think about, like, what are ways in which we can mitigate and create less harm in these sort of environments. So when we look again sort of at our balance of like who encounters bias at AMS, you can see people, on the more likely side are LGBTQ members, Black, Latinx, South Asian individuals, so communities of color feel as though they may have experienced, that they encounter bias more. People under the age of 45, and then also individuals with disabilities. And I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to place them here in the Q&A chat, and I'm happy to also get to those. All right, so when we move on to equity, I think equity is something that's really important because it really determines how well our long-term impacts are distributed, right? Are we creating spaces that allows individuals who may have been historically excluded, that they have a space, that they have a voice in our activities? So it's not just about getting people to show up and to participate, but it's really ensuring that people are benefiting from all of the opportunities, the resources, the leadership spaces that are there. And equity is something that's really vital because it creates that long-term growth, it creates leadership opportunities, and it really allows and enables people to have full participation within our activities. So how did we learn about equity? Again, at the individual level, wanting to understand, does everyone get long-term opportunities to grow and connect at AMS? And at an organizational level, is there really diversity in the leadership roles? Or does AMS take sufficient efforts to recruit and retain diverse members, diverse staff members? and creating multiple pathways for people to enter into the organizational space. So there were a lot of questions that asked folks about their perceptions of pathways to leadership. And for the most part, people feel as though, there are a diverse group of elected leaders. It could be better. There are a diverse group of people in staff roles, but that also could be better. And AMS does take some efforts to retain and recruit diverse groups of both members and also staff. So people have a perception that there is some diversity, but when you look at that across many different identities, those perceptions are probably less favorable in that way. So when we look at who feels that there are pathways to leadership, the people who are more likely to say, oh yes, there are many different pathways to leadership are people who are over the age of 45, who may identify as white and non-international, men. Also, people who are heterosexual feel that there are many different pathways to get into the leadership of the society. And then the folks who are probably feel less likely are those who come from more minoritized backgrounds or folks who may be more early career in their experiences. So now when we move towards access, and you can think about access in many different ways, but it really determines, who gets to participate, who gets to contribute, who gets to benefit. Are we creating spaces that are accessible for people from, many different backgrounds or who may have different challenges in that way? So how we learned about access is, again, thinking about it from an organizational level. What can AMS do to better meet people's needs? And what are ways in which we can get greater participation of folks? So when we look at some of the quotes that people have shared, I think people are just saying, we want equitable access when we are in AMS spaces, if it's at a conference, if it's at, other types of sponsored events. Even access to be able to attend a meeting is something that has been brought up in a number of these situations. So this one quote here talks about, I'm in a better spot now that my employer is able to create space for me to come to the AMS conferences, and by supplementing some of the costs that give me a better opportunity to have access to connect with colleagues, to network with individuals. There's a plus and minus of virtual participation in meetings, right? It's really hard at times to create or to mirror a very similar experience from folks who get to be in the room in person and then folks who are joining in a virtual setting. So oftentimes people feel as though they get less value or they have less access if they have to participate in a virtual or remote setting. And so what are ways in which we can do to create that space that really supports everyone as they try to contribute and participate? And I know that AMS has done a lot of work to bring in that virtual space, but I think it's the more and more that we can do to try to see how we can create generally a good community in person and also virtually. And so when the survey asked people, what are some areas in which AMS could better accommodate your needs? 48% of people, so almost half of the individuals, said that AMS could better meet their needs in at least one of these areas that you see below. If it's supporting their needs from a career stage level, most people were talking about things like, AMS has been really great for me as I was a student, but maybe I need more support as I move into that early career professional space, right? Or now that I'm a mid-career individual, how can I then still grow and learn and be more connected as I move into maybe more of a senior part of my career stage? And so then you also see here, age, socioeconomic status, those are other areas in which folks felt as though they could be better accommodated through the work of the AMS. Okay, so perception. When well tended, I think greater equity, inclusion, and justice in the present really can lead to more equity, inclusion, and justice in the future. The opposite can also be true. So people's perceptions of the community being good is a really good clue as to what the future of the society can look like. I think a lot of people, they may think something is happening or they think that something is not happening, right? But perceptions are how people talk, right? Perceptions are how people get information. And so perceptions can really lead to people's experiences and the culture of those experiences being really good or also being not as good. And so perceptions really lead to like why people may consider leaving a particular area. And so this slide here just really speaks to, you know, there's many different reasons in which people can feel as though they want to leave a society. 20% of people have considered ending their involvement with with AMS. 18% of members have considered leaving completely. 32% of staff have also considered leaving. 29% of people who considered leaving said it was because of equity, inclusion, justice as that reason. So there's many different areas, again, like I said, that can lead to dissatisfaction for folks. If it's people's handling of equity, inclusion, and justice concerns, if it's people feeling as though we say these words, but do we mean those words? I don't know. Others feel as though, you know, AMS may have gone too far as it relates to equity, inclusion, and justice. And so there's so many competing factors at place, but it's the perceptions that people have that ultimately result in if they choose to stay or or if they choose to leave. And when people have perceptions that there's a lack of either inclusive leadership or diverse leadership, that's something that can turn them away, especially when they don't see that there's avenues in which they can lead to their advancement in those spaces. So from there, that's like overall of what I'm going to share right now based off of some of the data that was collected. I'm now going to move into the recommendations and some of the strategies that were suggested as part of this work, but I want to pause if folks have any questions that they want to place here in the Q&A before I move on. All right, feel free to keep them coming. Okay, so as part of the activity, integrated work put together 7 recommendations that really reflected the direct feedback from the AMS community, and they summarized them in this way, that they felt that there were 7 opportunities that really could help AMS take those first steps moving forward. The first is around enhancing connection, developing programs that really speak to the unique needs of our membership, specifically those from historically marginalized groups. To promote communication. Communication is key in literally everything that we do. And so the more that we can reinforce not just the message, but the more that we can spotlight what we're doing, communicate about what we're doing, and even just clarifying what we mean when we say certain words or we do certain things, that's something that could really help us move forward with this work. The third is to improve reporting processes. I think a lot of people may not be aware of what reporting is there already and what are the steps that take place throughout that activity. The fourth is to advance education, to provide more training and support for folks to learn more, to grow more as it relates to equity, inclusion, and justice. Recommendation 5 is really to foster pathways to leadership, to promote inclusive pathways to leadership and also recognition, to ensure that it's not just the same individuals that are doing, you know, that are just moving up the ranks within the society and creating many different pathways for people to come into the space. Number 6 is to optimize accessibility, to develop comprehensive tools and accountability that lead to greater accessibility. And then the 7th and final one was really to expand financial support, to offer more flexible financial assistance to support broader participation within the activities. So within each of these recommendations, integrated work provided a number of different strategies that are connected to them. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I am going to share a few strategies as it relates to recommendations 1, 2, 3, and also number 5. And if you're interested again in seeing all of the recommendations and all of the strategies, again, you can access that full report on the AMS website. So the first recommendation is around enhancing connection and really developing programs that are tailored to the unique needs of our members, specifically those from historically marginalized groups. And this really matters because enhancing connection leads to greater sense of belonging, more active participation, builds the longevity of folks' membership, and leads to a more stronger, more cohesive community. So a couple of those strategies. Strategy 1 is really to increase recruitment efforts with historically underrepresented groups. So doing things like boosting engagement in communities of color, specifically supporting historically Black colleges and universities or other minority serving institutions. The second strategy is to foster structured mentorship programs to support technical and leadership development. And that's to really broaden the mentorship programs across the weather, water, climate community. I think oftentimes there's a lot of activities that happen in the early career space, which is all good and fine, but people are also looking at ways that they can still experience and receive mentorship as they move throughout their different career stages. And the third strategy is really to prioritize retention through intentional networking opportunities. Oh, I forgot to advance my slides. Sorry about that. The third strategy is really about thinking about inclusive opportunities for engagement, leadership, for research, for some facilitated, structured one-on-one networking opportunities to really accommodate folks' diverse needs and their perspectives, to advertise some of these identity-based gatherings as a focus on connection without leading to tokenization. And so really thinking through, like, how do we prioritize and create the spaces for these things? And then an additional thought behind that was to really conduct sort of community conversations and helping individuals sort of transition into retirement in the weather, water, climate community. Recommendation 2 is around promoting communication. I think, things go bad when we don't communicate, right? And so the more and more that we can communicate and in the various different platforms in which we communicate, I think will really reinforce the importance of equity, inclusion, justice issues within AMS and really spotlight our success, because communication really connects with a demonstrated commitment to work. And it really gets everyone to understand what are our values, what are our actions, what are the things that we're doing to really set us apart and lead to more intentional work. So the first strategy is really around establishing clear communication channels. If that's sharing impactful stories, if it's using a lot of storytelling to tell about ways in which people are included within the society, if it's strengthening the AMS website, just in general to be more user friendly, to be a hub for external individuals, but also a space for internal individuals as well. And to really, I think ultimately I would just say to really be able to communicate what we're doing so that everybody is aware. There are a lot of recommendations or a lot of ideas that came out through this process, and some of us were like, oh, we're already doing those things, but clearly that messaging isn't getting out. So what are other ways in which we can share those messages in that way? Strategy 2 around communication is really encouraging leadership advocacy and messaging to ensure that our leaders, if that's leaders from a staff perspective or leaders from the volunteer society, if it's the presidents, if it's the council, if it's chairs of boards and committees, that people understand the importance of equity and inclusion, that they see it in the work that they're doing, that they're also messaging that out to the rest of the people within their spaces. Recommendation 3 is around improving reporting, and this is specifically around the bias reporting system. In a lot of the information that was shared through the equity assessment process, it was clear that a lot of folks were not really aware as to like what happens when there is a bias incident and a report is being put in, right? Then what happens? Like how do we know, that an issue was resolved? How do we know that there was some sort of justice in that space? So I think a piece, and I know that lots of individuals are already working on this right now, is like creating a strong bias reporting system that really speaks to all of the levels of it. If it's speaking about the incidents that are occurring, if it's without all the detail, but also speaking to like, here's what we've done, here's what we've learned, and this is where we're moving forward. So in the improving reporting space, there's 3 different strategies. The first is around clarifying definitions. To really make it clear, like what is a bias incident, what may be a harassment incident, and how does that fit within the scope of the AMS activities. The AMS Committee on Ethics has been working really diligently over the last year to update some of the things as it relates to bias and the bias reporting system. And there will be opportunities for community comments probably coming up actually very soon that really speaks to, what are our definitions? What does the process look like? Who can report activities? And then where are we sharing out some of the the outcomes in that way. Again, without identifying individuals in that way. Strategy 2, again, is updating those reporting processes, clarifying the process, the timeline by streamlining reporting steps. Again, the Committee of Ethics is really working hard on this. And then the third strategy is to really implement some sort of comprehensive follow-up, addressing those reported incidents, creating a dashboard on the website so folks are aware that things are happening, unfortunately, but we are taking the steps to also solve them. So it creates this feedback loop that really, one, makes us more transparent about what's happening, but also creating space so individuals know that like this is a serious activity. Okay, so to dive into recommendation 5, which is to foster pathways to leadership, you know, we need equitable access. So we need a diversity of folks who are within the leadership sphere. And it really helps to promote greater inclusion in that way. So this matters because inclusive pathways lead to, you know, full participation and contribution from everyone. And it keeps people engaged, right? And it also leads to, you know, more advantages and a stronger network within our society. So these strategies, strategy 1 is to really promote leadership and advancement opportunities, to encourage young or early and mid-career members to take on leadership roles. But it can be really scary or really hard to figure out how do you actually take on a leadership role. So if we can create clear pathways for involvement, if it's helping a person get on their first committee, right? If it's helping them shadow to see what is it like to be a chair of a committee or a chair of a board, just creating those spaces and also the practices and the policies around it so people can understand that there is actually a pathway. Like someone has asked me, how do you become a president of the AMS, right? So thinking through what are the steps that it takes to potentially get there and the different inroads, because not everybody's path is the same. Strategy 2 is to cultivate diversity in leadership roles and decision-making positions. So being more transparent as to how we create these pathways, but also transparent on like, what do the metrics look like? Like, are we doing a good job in having a diverse group of individuals on our committees? So for those of you who are chairs and leaders of committees, really thinking about like, what does the makeup of your committee look like? Are you bringing in early career, mid-career, maybe more senior career folks? Are you bringing together people from the different sectors or from, you know, diverse racial backgrounds or gender backgrounds as well? So I think there's something that we all can do as we lead and kind of transcend the different leadership opportunities within the society. And then strategy 3 is really to offer career stage specific support. So really tailoring programs to really speak to the different transitional periods in which we have that lead to skill enhancement, that lead to advancement. And I think there are ways in which we can promote and invest in many different areas to really help create those pathways again that really lead to like equitable access within the society. So I guess I challenge all of you, those are the recommendations, to think through in the spaces and in the networks that you are in as part of the AMS. What are ways in which you can sort of apply some of these different recommendations? How can you think about the diversity of your committee in various different ways? How can you think about when you're creating conferences at the annual meeting or at specialty conferences? How do you employ and implement and embed in some of these activities that were brought up through this equity assessment? How can you ensure that everybody feels that they belong as part of that committee, right? Creating inclusivity in that way as well. All right, so for the final piece of this, and I think it'll be just a few more minutes, I wanted to share a little bit about now that we've worked with integrated work in developing this culture survey, hearing from our members, having post-survey focus groups, and sort of culminating all of these ideas together to create these recommendations, where do we go from here? So we have this diagram, and again, this is just a draft diagram as of this month as to how we're going to move forward in a process to think about these equity assessment outcomes. So here I'm showing on the slide sort of our roadmap of where we're going to go. I know it's really tiny font, so I'm going to zoom in to each step. So the first step, and this timeline was from February up until June of 2024. The Culture and Inclusion Cabinet, which is the committee or cabinet that I'm the chair of, we have been working with AMS staff to really review and evaluate the outcomes that have come from this equity assessment. From there, it's all about collaboration. And I think we need all of you who are here on this webinar today, everyone that's a part of the society, to really think through what is your role in this activity. The Culture and Inclusion Cabinet is planning to work with the council, with the commissions, with the staff to really identify and develop an inventory of the current work and activities that are focused around equity and inclusion, to assess how these activities map back to the outcomes, but also to assess the alignment that these activities are having with our AMS strategic goals. And the idea behind this is that we take this inventory of work, we map it to our strategic goals, and we work with our planning commission, which is the commissioners of all of the different areas within the society, to really see, where does this all fit in? How do we start to think about what are the goals, the actions, and the metrics that we want to set? Which leads to our third part, where our commissioners, and if you haven't taken a look at the organizational chart of the AMS, I would strongly encourage you to do that, so that when I say some of these words that you know who is a commissioner and what is that commissioner of, right? So as an example, the commissioner of the education and engagement group really does a number of different activities. They have a number of different boards that fall within that activity. So we want to work with those commissioners and with our board chairs, our committee chairs, to really think about what are the goals, what are the concrete actions, what are the metrics that they want to work on over this next year, and how does that align and map with our strategic goals as a society. From there to then communicate these efforts. Communication was one of the recommendations. I think we need to continually communicate that we are working on these things, sharing it with the membership as I'm doing today, talking about it at our annual meetings, through webinars, through our specialty conferences. And like the equity, inclusion, and justice work doesn't just stop at the annual meeting, right? So it's really important that we really embed it, that it's a foundational piece of all of the work that we do. And so we really need everybody on board in order to make that happen. And then finally, the fifth step is to measure success, right? What does success look like after 1 year as we set our goals, our actions, and our metrics? How do we know that we're meeting those pieces that we said? And how do we use this as a society together to move forward our efforts as it relates to equity, inclusion, and justice? So with that, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I appreciate all the comments that people have sent me related to what we've learned so far. And it sounds like people are excited by some of the strategies and the recommendations that have been put forward by this work and want to continue to engage. All right, well, if I don't see any specific questions, I'm going to thank you all for joining me today. Again, if you'd like to access the full report, feel free to take a scan of this QR code. I should have put my email address on the site, but I forgot. But feel free to connect with me, to contact me if you want to learn more, if you want to think about other ways in which you can engage. If you are a board, a committee chair, a commissioner, and you want to talk more with me or with members of the CIC, we are always open to do that as well. So with that, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.